Hello again, YouTube. Just another response to theowarner. Um, his most recent video, in its essence, was a challenge to articulate some understanding of what prayer is, and this ties into something else that I've been thinking about lately. And that is, in general, I think that we have a tendency as atheists to look at these kinds of practices in a really reductionist way. And I think the other side of the coin, or another example that I'd like to juxtapose the notion of prayer and what it is faith itself. First of all, prayer. I think that we have a tendency to look at prayer as being some kind of, I ask for something and then God responds and gives me something, right? This seems to be the standard sort of atheist conception of how prayer works and what it is and what its goal is and etc. And I think that there is, prayer is obviously a very big concept that spans many religions and many traditions within those religions. So as a result, it's the genealogy of prayer is actually going to be something very complex and something that's going to have internal mutual exclusions. There are going to be aspects of that genealogy that conflict with one another, because throughout the history of prayer there are traditions that don't agree with one another. That's important to realize. So the development of a what theowarner had suggested, some sort of comprehensive theory or analysis of what prayer is, I think is impossible in an ahistorical sense. You have to put it into the discourse of religion in the broader scale, right? And again, I'm going to talk mainly about Christianity because that's the religion that I am familiar with. That's the religion that I was raised with. That's the religion that I've studied rigorously. And it would be, I just don't feel I'm qualified to comment on an Islamic perspective of prayer or a Judaic perspective of prayer. So there is this tradition within Christianity, I think, of I ask God for something and then God responds with that, and I think you could probably find biblical grounds for that perspective. But I think there's another side of the Christian tradition of prayer, the side that's more in line with Christian mysticism, and again, we've talked about things like negative theology in my previous videos, more contemplative Christianity. Perhaps we could even say more monastic Christianity. And within that light, prayer is it's not a series of requests or some kind of devotion, paying insurance just in case you need something later in the future. I don't think that relationship, obviously that relationship would be debunkable in over a weekend, right? You could have a seminar with some more advanced theologians, and I think that they could do away with that concept pretty quickly. Prayer, then, it's an act of contemplation, an act of meditation. Um, it's something for the person that's praying, rather than something, I'm saying something to someone, right? Even though it might be predicated on that sort of asymmetrical relationship. And there's that conception of prayer as a meditative discipline. First of all, I think it can be interpreted in a materialist way, which is always attractive to me. And on the other hand, I think that you can find that in the history of Christianity. I mentioned monastic lifestyles. Like this is where I'm thinking, and in the mystic tradition of Christianity, these sort of notion of cultivating a certain lifestyle, cultivating a certain awareness, and internalizing certain, I don't want to say propositions, but internalizing certain outlooks that can be applied in practical ways, right? And stepping aside from the world, I think, is a piece of it too. Stepping into a space that's aside from sort of the day-to-day rat race of our existence, right? That's an aspect of it also. I think that stepping out and that removing oneself from our standard sort of instrumental concerns and issues is essential to the contemplative experience, and I think that that's essential to the religious experience. And I also think that it can function without the existence of a deity. Working out exactly what that means is something that is perhaps beyond the scope of this video. The other side of the coin, the other thing I wanted to discuss was the notion of faith, because this is more the grounds that I've been thinking about things on. I think that we as non-believers tend to have this reductionist notion of faith, that it's something that's epistemological, right? That it's I heard someone refer to it once as the elevation of a proposition to truth without evidence or even in the face of evidence. And I think that if you take the notion of, first of all, I think it's naive to take the notion of faith on these grounds, even though, again, there may be a tradition of Christianity that embodies that. I think that faith is a much deeper experience, and I think faith is much more about the cultivation of openness to the unknown, or as I've referred to in other videos, the other, right? Cultivation of the openness to that. I recently moved from New York to New Orleans for reasons that I can't necessarily describe. But that move, what my life would be when I went from New York to New Orleans, that change, there's an aspect of otherness in that, right? But at the same time, this terrifying dimension of otherness, stepping into that, having the courage to step into that and having the openness to it, I think that is much more the experience of faith, um, in a much richer sense. And I'm not a religious person, but if I were to talk about faith in a materialistic sense, this is the sense in which it would be. It would be the openness to this unknown aspect that's hurtling at you, or that would even have the potential to hurtle at you. Um, and I think that prayer and faith operate in a sort of conjunction with one another. Prayer, in some sense, would be the cultivation of faith, rather than, you know, I ask this deity who I have no evidence for his existence, but I've elevated him to the status of existence in my mind through a sheer act of, will, of wishful thinking. I ask that deity for something. That's not. I think that there's a danger in the atheist community, and I've seen it a lot, where you reduce these concepts to this sort of epistemological, highly instrumental notion of both faith and prayer. And I think that's a problem. I think that it... I think that it's embarrassing, too. It's embarrassing for me to self-identify as an atheist alongside people who would crassly dismiss these experiences in such a way, reduce them from I think very, pertinent aspects of human life, just existential human life. The aspect of contemplation and cultivating an openness to the unknown, and perhaps even the unknowable. These are real existential issues that apply to everybody, regardless of whether or not they're religious. And I think, faith and prayer happen to be two, as Foucault would put it, technologies, two tools that have been developed within the religious mindset, or within the religious discourse, of dealing with those issues. And I think in this sense they may, there may even be a value in living a life apart from God, in these kinds of notions, maybe not performed in the same way. That's another aspect of prayer too, that's important, that it would be tragic not to mention. The affirmation of community, I think, is part of prayer, and the affirmation of community in the face of otherness, right? And I think this analysis of both faith and prayer, in some way, this is Heideggerian, or very existentialist, right? The notion that we're thrown into the world without knowledge of who we are or where we're going, right? Starting from that standpoint, starting from this existentialist even standpoint, I think that we can see the value in dealing with these concepts at these levels, and yeah. So that's my response to the issue of prayer. As always, Theo Warner's video will be in the comments, and comment, subscribe, and have a good day.